Hey guys, it's Scott with Scottie B Cards. In this video, I want to talk about the best players of every generation. Generational. We hear that term thrown out a lot, especially if you're a sports fan. Lots of teams' home announcers are kind of biased. They think their players are generational. But how many generational players are there truly at one given time? Is it one guy for a generation or is it multiple? And how does that apply to sports cards? Does it matter? Are the generational players the only ones you should target? Should you only collect an Ohtani and not collect a Machado, right? Like, what is generational and how does it impact sports cards? That's what we want to discuss in this video. So very first thing, let's define what a generational player is. A generation, by the way, is 20 to 25 years according to Google. So if it's on Google, it means it's true. But 20 to 25 years, so that means only 1 to 5 players every 20 to 25 years are going to have value if we look at generational from that perspective. So because I've been hearing it so much lately, I want to define what a generational player is from other baseball card collectors and figure out what players are viewed as the most generational so you know which players to target from this generation and past generations. So how do we define what a generational player is? Are they the best player of a generation, meaning every 20 to 25 years? If that's the case, that's obviously Ohtani right now, all the way to the year 2000. Ohtani's the best. Sorry, Pujols, you are done. No one cares, right? That's not exactly accurate, but that is one way you can look at it. You also can define as the best player or players of a specific decade, like the 2010s or the 2020s. We also can define it as a player who is remembered for generations, or you could even define it as someone who is doing something that no one ever has in the past. So can there be more than one generational player? That is something I polled my audience. We can discuss. And if that's the case, only the top of all Major League Baseball players, even though there's great players in the history of Major League Baseball, are going to have that premier value. Whether it's going to be just liquidity or a wider collector's base, whatever it is, there's only a few players that really have that have the cream of the crop when it comes to their card values. Not saying there's other players that can't have value, like a Machado that I mentioned already, or even a Larry Walker. I collect him and I pay good money for Larry Walker cards. And other Larry Walker collectors bid me up on those cards and I lose to them and so forth. But either way, how would you best define generational? I asked my audience, I had about 1,000 viewers, maybe 600 to 700 votes on these polls. And the two biggest answers were the best player or players of a decade. The other answer was players remembered for generations. People did not define it as best players of the last 25 plus years, like what a true generation is. That was only 15%. And even less, 7% said a potential top 20 all-time player. They don't think that's it. They think it's players either remembered for generations or the best players of specific decades. On top of that, I asked how many generational players can there be at one time? I put one, right? If there's only one player, 7% said one player. 54% said 2 to 5 players can be generational at one time. 11% said 5 to 10. And then we have in the bottom 185 votes. 28% said any number. It just depends on the decade, meaning some decades may have 1, some decades may have 10. Is kind of the perspective there. So let's look at the decades since the 1940s, maybe the 1930s. I started in the 30s, and we can decide who are the generational players of those decades, right? Because I think that's how I personally would define it, are the best players of their respective decades. They're going to be remembered in that era. So we have Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig. You can't argue those two are generational in my opinion. Babe Ruth obviously is number one, but Lou Gehrig is great. Mel Ott, Lefty Grove. 1940s, you have Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams, Stan Musial, maybe even Bob Feller. The 1950s have a ton, but we have Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, Hank Aaron, Ernie Banks, Jackie Robinson. 60s, we have Koufax, Pete Rose, Frank Robinson, Bob Gibson, and Roberto Clemente. 1970s, we have Bench, Morgan, and Schmidt. 1980s, Cal Ripken Jr., Ricky Henderson, Nolan Ryan, and Wade Boggs. 1990s, there's quite a few. Barry Bonds, Ken Griffey Jr., Pedro Martinez, maybe that's pushing it. He's really good. He's like one of my favorite pitchers. Same with Randy Johnson. Roger Clemens, maybe Frank Thomas. I ran a poll and only like 50% of people said Frank Thomas was generational, so maybe I could remove him from the collector's thought, but I think he's pretty dang generational myself. 2000s, we have Derek Jeter, right? So what defines generational? Is it just a good player? Because there's other players who have better counting stats than Derek Jeter, but Derek Jeter is very much generational in the sense where he was above baseball in a lot of ways. He was so popular. He was also very good, almost 3,500 hits, 5 World Series for the Yankees. That is generational to a lot of people. Mariano Rivera, Albert Pujols, Ichiro, maybe even Alex Rodriguez. Then we get to the 2010s and the 2020s. I put Trout, Betts, Cabrera, Kershaw, and Verlander. Those are the ones. In the 2020s, I put Ohtani, Judge, and Soto. As of right now is what it's shaping up to be. So if we look at the best players of a decade, yes, I think we can all agree that there's more than one generational player for every 25 years, because that means Babe Ruth, the only generational player. And then we have either probably Willie Mays, and then we have Ricky Henderson, and then I'll even show you. This is what it looks like just for one player in each decade. So you're only telling me there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players that matter in baseball history? I don't think think so. So I think 2 to 5 from each decade is how it's going to look, in my perspective. So I asked my audience next, do you view the player as generational? The players I have in here are players I have heard called generational, not that I think they're generational. So as a good example, here's Vlad. People say he's generational. They've been saying that since he was a prospect. And only 10% think Vlad is a generational caliber player. For these younger guys, it's tough because they can develop into generational talent, especially because it's so early in their careers. It's easier to look at a Ohtani or even like a Betts where they're more established and say they are. But either way, 10% thinks Vlad is generational. 37% thinks Freddie is generational. Freddie kind of reminds me of another player, very different, but they played in the same team for a little bit, I believe, but that was Chipper Jones. Chipper Jones, I put on there, one of the best switch hitters of all time, second to only Mickey Mantle, I would say, and only like 45% said he was generational. So Freddie's in that same boat, not viewed as generational. Bobby Witt, 40% said generational at this point. I think Witt, if he has another big year this year, that could definitely push up and he could be one of the 2020s players. Ronald Acuna Jr., 46% said he was generational. Obviously, this would be higher if he didn't get hurt. I think that's people's concern here. Bryce Harper, 55% said he was generational, so we're getting a little bit higher now. Then we have Juan Soto at 67% think he is generational. And we've been hearing about Soto's generational talent forever. We should discuss generational talent versus generational player. You can have all the talent in the world and not become a generational player. Look at David Wright, Hall of Fame talent, probably not a Hall of Famer simply because after age 30 he was hurt, but up till age 30 he was a definitive Hall of Famer. He was very good. And that's kind of how this same thing probably operates. Mookie Betts, these are the top 4 now. If 75% believe someone is generational, I think it really kind of looks like they may be, but Mookie Betts had 75% of the vote. Aaron Judge, even after the recency bias of struggling in the postseason and having the drop ball fiasco, is still at 76%. He'd be much higher if he would have just missed the playoffs this year after the season he had, which is kind of crazy. But I think he'll be even higher once the season starts and we can kind of move past this postseason. But 76% for Aaron Judge. Here's actual votes between the two. So over 800 votes for both players. 623 said Mookie was, 635 said Aaron Judge was, and 6 more votes on a no for Mookie Betts than Aaron Judge. And I will say it was very intriguing looking at these people that I respect, and it's always fun to see how people vote and believe who they vote for and who they don't. Because a lot of people voted for Mookie and not Judge, and a lot of people voted for Judge and not Mookie. It's just very interesting. At number 2, who is viewed definitely as a generational talent, 93% said Mike Trout, which makes sense. He could have been a lot higher than 93% if he'd just stayed healthy the last 4 years. But I don't think you can argue that Mike Trout was one of the generational players of the 2010s, and he's going to have great stats and be remembered, and that's who he is. But at number 1, no surprise, 98%, 2%, which is I think 15 to 25 votes, said no to Ohtani. So I don't know what Ohtani has to do for those individuals, but just know Ohtani, 98% generational, makes total sense. So what defines a generational player and how does it really matter to baseball cards, right? Individual stats for generational makes total sense. Look at a Pujols. Team success, look at a Pujols. Legacy, look at a Pujols, right? And uniqueness, look at Ohtani. Like a good example to really like individual stats, someone like Alex Rodriguez has great individual stats. Albert Pujols has great individual stats. Hank Aaron, all of these guys, team success. Some players like Derek Jeter are viewed as generational mostly because, yes, they had great individual stats in some ways, but their team success was fantastic as well. Same with legacy. Some players can be viewed as generational due to legacy, and people might not be viewed as generational because of the lack of legacy in people's eyes with awards and stats and things like that. And then uniqueness. This one I think does matter, and that's why like a Bo Jackson, I didn't ask about Bo Jackson, but he obviously played football and baseball and was bigger than life, so people still collect him. And maybe he's not generational in the traditional sense, but he's still collected and wanted. So I guess I wanted to look at this and define who are the best players of our generation to collect, who is viewed as the most collectible in a lot of ways. And those 4 players I think so far is Ohtani, Trout, Judge, and Betts. Obviously time will tell on others like Soto, Bobby Witt, and even Ronald Acuna Jr. if I'm being honest. But those top 4 players right now are the ones that people are viewing right now as the ones in the future will have value. So very interesting results. Thanks for watching, everybody. Let me know in the comments down below how you define generational and who you think will matter in the future, and I will see you in the next video.